Hello everyone. It's so great to see such a full crowd here for Jane Harper. This is, her new book is hot off the press, so it's great to see some eager readers out there. I'm Sarah Lestrange and I'm from the book show at ABC Radio National, and I heard some yeses out there. I'm hoping that there are some listeners as well. That's great. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I acknowledge all Indigenous people who may well be in the audience with us today, which is a special day because here I have a new book by this wonderful person here, Jane Harper. This is her 6th book, Jane. That's so amazing. Oh, thank you. 6 books since 2016, of course, starting with The Dry. But not just that, there's 3 screen adaptations, which are just beautiful. And all of your books are on the bestseller list. It's quite extraordinary. And they're published from Hungary to South Korea. Your new book is Last One Out. It's wonderful. And I'd just like you all to please welcome Jane Harper with a big applause.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Now, we are going to do audience questions at the end. And I don't know if you've come across this, but Slido is this fantastic way for everyone to have a say. So you can write in your questions into Slido. You scan the QR code. You can put in your questions, and you can actually vote on other people's questions if you're really interested in that. It's quite fun, and I monitor the questions here on the iPad. So when it comes to question time, I'll be going off Slido, which is in front of me, and hoping that you've all got some really wonderful questions for Jane. I know Jane really enjoys audience questions, so it's a great opportunity for you to speak to ask her that, that question you've always wanted to know, but no spoilers. You might not spoil this one because you probably haven't read it, but no spoilers for her other books either, okay? We've got the ground rules. So Jane, I want to know, what is it like when your book is hot off the press? This is day 2. Do you have to pep yourself up? How does it feel?
Yeah, it's quite surreal actually, because the book came out yesterday, and it is like quite a weird moment, I think, when something that you've worked on for so long kind of on your own. I mean, with the editors and with kind of few sort of trusted people, but then when it actually goes out there and it's kind of for everybody to read, it's a great moment though, because I mean that's what you're working for. I mean, writing is such a kind of solitary experience, and then to have it out there and then be able to kind of come out and like see all you guys, and like thank you so much for coming out tonight, by the way. It's a really wonderful way to kind of, I think, celebrate a really big moment in for sure in the book's journey. So thank you particularly for coming out to right at the start of the tour.
Do you have to mentally prepare though? Fortify yourself, or after 6 books, are you sort of used to it by now?
I think it's every book. It's interesting because every book, both writing and then kind of seeing it out there, has been a different experience. When The Dry first came out, I mean, that was such a huge moment for me, because I'd wanted to write a book for so long, and then finally kind of this dream was coming true, and it was out there, and I'd never had any experience of anybody kind of reading my writing before, so that was a huge kind of step, but really wonderful at the same time. I mean, seeing it, the thrill of like seeing it on the shelves, but I still get that, since yesterday I've had, my mum sort of text me a photo. She saw the book at the airport, and and then she saw it at readings, where she walked past and things. So my mum's been sending me quite a lot of photos, texts, and we all find it exciting. They find it exciting as well, because I mean it is really fun, I think, to see that thing that's just kind of being contained in your computer actually kind of suddenly out there for real as well, like in real kind of book form.
And the fact that your other books have made it onto bestseller lists, does this put extra pressure on you?
Look, I think it could, like, absolutely. I think there is, there is that kind of expectation, I guess, like I'm aware that, for example, the publishers would have an idea of how many books they want to sell, and they would have like a budget and things prepared around, expectations around it. But then at the same time, I mean, I think, you can only do what you can do. I mean, I can't really, I sort of speak about this a lot in various things about writing, like trying to just control what you can control, because, you can't really have any impact on like the reading market, or how people are spending their money, or where it's going to be positioned in the bookshops, or anything like that. The only thing that's really ever in my control is writing the book in the first place. And so I always kind of try and really focus my efforts on, just making sure that the book that I've written is the best sort of version of that story that I could tell with my skills at this point. And I've done, I've put the hours in, and I've done all the kind of work that I could think to do, so that when I've kind of handed it over for the last time, that I feel confident that this is the best book that I could write around this story. And I feel like at every point, for every book, I've got to that point, and I felt that very much with this book. So kind of whatever happens after that is sort of, out of my hands. I think I sort of feel like I've done my bit.
And I definitely feel that care you're putting into your work. You're not just, I mean, you have an incredible output, but there is a lot of care in the detail and I think the emotional strength that comes through in the books. Now, last time we spoke, Jane, we were talking about exiles, and you were actually angling for a break after that book. You'd had young children, you'd come through lockdowns and the pandemic in Melbourne. How did that break pan out for you?
Yeah, so it was good. I think, it's sort of, so I'd been doing, for the first 3 books, I did one a year. And I actually, the Dry came out the same year as my first child, my daughter Charlotte, who's actually here tonight. So she was born that same year. And so, it was, I have to say those early years were an absolute kind of, like, honestly, a bit of a fugue state. Like, I can't really tell you how I wrote books when I had sort of young children. Babies essentially, and so I did three in 3 years, and then I sort of, they sold enough that I was able to kind of then negotiate to do one every other year, and then just for the last one, I mean, both my children were sort of at the start of school in their last years of kinder, and I just I think. I honestly just wanted to kind of make sure that writing was going to be sustainable, because I really enjoy it, and I really feel very lucky to kind of have the opportunity to write books that I enjoy and do things like this and write full time. But at the same time, I can't. I didn't want to kind of burn out with it and get to the point where I sort of really resented doing it, or it was just sort of too hard, or it was taking me away from the things that were kind of important, like spending time with my family. So, I asked him if I could have a bit of an extra time between Exiles and this book, which is why there's been a 3-year gap. And I have to say, it was really good for me. I didn't really write for quite a lot of that time. I didn't miss it. I didn't sort of. I think it was good to have the break and have kind of let your kind of creativity kind of build up again. And then it allowed me to kind of think about what story I really wanted to write. And I kind of had a few ideas that, didn't sort of pan out, that I didn't really feel like I wanted to pursue. And then this was a story that kind of came to the surface and became the one that I was very clear to me I wanted to focus on. And then I ended up writing it quite quickly, actually. I think after having that time to sort of really refresh, it then meant when I got back to, writing a book I really felt passionate about, it actually kind of all came together really, really nicely, actually. It was a really good process to write it.
Oh, it's good that you had a rest then. And of course, Exiles was your goodbye to Aaron Falk, the star of 3 of your novels, and starting with The Dry, of course. How did your mum react to his retirement?
Well, look, she was pretty vocal at the time, and then I don't know how many of you saw, there was a Good Weekend article last weekend that where she was interviewed in my absence, I have to say. So, I said afterwards, how did it go? She's like, oh, great, we didn't say anything to embarrass you. And it's like, well, why would you even bring that up? Why do you feel the need to clarify that? But look, she and my dad, they didn't, but my mum did have a few comment she wanted to get on the record about how she felt like I shouldn't have moved on for that character. He still had much more to give, and that was a mistake. And then she also made a few comments about how I needed more snakes in the books as well. That was also something she felt she wanted to get on the record. So she has now. It's in print. It's noted.
She's had her turn.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Last One Out, this book that, you felt like the story bubbled to the surface and you felt really comfortable with it. It's a book about a grieving mother, a missing son, and a rural town that's really in free fall. The book is set in outback New South Wales. Take us to Carralong, this dying town.
Yeah, so when I was writing this book, and I think when I've written all the books, but there's always sort of something that I kind of keep in mind, like we're kind of regardless of what's happening on the page, it's kind of there's sort of a feeling that I want to exist as an undercurrent through the book. And for this book, there were two things, and one was the main character of Ro, who is a woman who has spent raised her children in this town and has been a big part of this community, and then her adult son goes missing on the night before his 21st birthday, and the kind of the grief. So it's kind of grief and loss that has just really permeated every aspect of her life. And then the second thing was this kind of reflected in a similar sort of thing happening in this fictional town, but one that I think is echoed. There's so many towns in Australia go through a similar situation where it was once beautiful and it was loved and it was this thriving community, and then for various reasons, people have left, and it's become this shadow of itself, and it's really essentially a sort of ghost town, just with a few people kind of hanging on to the memories of what it was. So there was those two kind of elements that I really wanted to bring out in the book, and they kind of echoed each other.
Yeah, and Rowena Ro she's returned to the town. It's 5 years since the disappearance of her son, as Jane said, on his 21st birthday, and she's returned for a memorial. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so the book kind of opens up with the disappearance of this young guy called Sam, who grew up in this town with his family, and then moved away for university. And he came back and was doing a bit of a research project for his university studies. And on the eve of his birthday, just didn't come home, basically. And we sort of open up. Kind of with his disappearance, but then the book really starts 5 years on, when Ro has come back to this town, which was already struggling even when Sam disappeared, but now 5 years on, it's just an absolute kind of shell of what it used to be. And she returns every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, sort of partly to keep his memory alive. I think with maybe partly sort of hopes, I guess, to sort of find some answers. But I think one thing I really liked about writing her character was she's quite realistic. I think about, she's not kind of there really putting on her detective hats, thinking she's going to crack this thing wide open. She's really there as a grieving parent, trying to come to terms with this huge loss that has really, caused a huge sort of chasm in the lives of her family.
And this is actually the first time you've had a female lead, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, which it was really good to write, actually. I think, I get asked quite a lot about, the main characters, because in the previous 5 books, all the main characters have been men, which has been for, a couple of reasons, really. I mean, 3 of them had Falk as the main character, so that was kind of, that was them. And then the 2 standalones, The Lost Man and Survivors, were ones where, I do think quite closely about who is going to be the main character. And I think the main character has to be, it has to be someone who plays a really specific role in the story. They have to have certain insights, and they have to have certain relationships with the other characters, and they have to have a certain kind of connection with whatever the mystery is going to be. And for both of those standalones, I did consider, whose point of view, and it wasn't sort of a case where, you could do a sort of a gender swap with either of those characters, I feel, and still tell the same story. I think both those stories had to be male protagonists as well. But then, conversely, for this one, I felt immediately that this was, in terms of who would tell a story, Ro is absolutely the right person to tell a story. She had all the kind of the qualities that you need to kind of guide the reader through, and she was a good sort of character, I think, to give us an insight into what's going on, and she had the right connection to what was happening. So so it's about choosing that right character. But I was really happy that this was an opportunity to write about someone like her.
Yeah, so, and in the meantime, since her son disappeared, her marriage has crumbled, and along with the rest of the town. And also the family was grieving about the death of an important family member, Warren, as well. And you weave this into the story as well.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what I was mentioning earlier about wanting that undercurrent of grief and loss, because sort of whatever is kind of happening, on the page in terms of the action, sort of everyone in the story, ideally, as a to the readers, as a reader, you will sense that kind of grief for all different things. So I mean, there's the mystery itself, but then there's also this very sort of communal grief about the loss of this town that has meant something to them all, and I also though wanted to have a bit of I feel books can be kind of sad and moving, but at the same time, you don't want to, as a reader myself, I don't want to be left ultimately feeling sad and like I've been kind of just being pulled through the ringer by the thing. You want to kind of enjoy it. Like, it's supposed to be entertaining, and it's supposed to be something that is kind of a nice way to sort of pass the time. So I always like to have a bit of a glimmer of hope and redemption in the books. And I think in this one, despite all the kind of grief and loss they're going through, I think there is that kind of sense of trying to kind of find happiness in a different form. And maybe, you have to accept that things are not going to be how they were, but there is a different sort of a different life out there if you can kind of move on and accept that.
And coming back to the setting, so we're in this fictional town, Carralong. Why is it fictional?
Well, it's fictional. I always fictionalise the towns. I think
is that because it's dangerous to set it in a actual
yes.
place? People write in.
Yeah, I think, as you and I both know, as Joes, I mean, I'm very familiar with libel laws for one thing, and I think it's. But I think also out of respect for people who actually live in these communities. I mean, I can't imagine much worse than someone like me coming along and writing about your community where you can recognise the person who runs that shop or the bloke who owns the pub or whatever, and know that they're talking about you or your neighbour or someone. So I always fictionalise them, partly out of the respect factor, partly I think as well because honestly it's easier as an author. I rarely understand why authors sometimes choose real places unless it's somewhere big like say New York City or something, but if you have a real place, you are absolutely committed to kind of the geography of that place. The roads have to be where they are, the school has to be where it is, the geographical landscape has to be how it is. So you have to really commit to that. With fiction, obviously, you can move those roads, you can add in, take away, whatever you need to. But then also the challenge really then is to try and create a fictional place that feels real, that feels like somewhere that that we recognise, and you feel like, oh yes, actually I've there used to be a place like that out near Mum's place, or I read about that newspaper. So something that feels recognisable without actually being real is the kind of exactly where I want to land.
Yeah, the sweet spot. Now it's a dying town because there's this mine that's just growing and growing, and it's buying off all these properties. You're known for your deep research. Did you visit towns like this?
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me when I was writing this book was exactly how many towns are like this. So interesting that the idea for so I always say, anybody who's ever heard me speak about books before, I always say you should write down all your ideas because you think you'll remember them, but you won't. You really, it's honestly amazing when you look back. When I look back, I look at ideas and I think, that's a great idea. I don't even remember having that idea. But anyway, so this book actually was probably born a good 5 years ago. when I read an article about a community very much like the one in the book, where some people were being interviewed, where they were essentially lamenting the loss of this community that they had clearly loved, and they were so kind of passionate about it. But the thing that struck me about it was how, I could see why they had loved it, but you could also see as an outsider that everything they'd loved about it was gone. It just wasn't there anymore. The friends had gone, the shops had closed, like the footy team had disbanded. Everything was just gone, and it clearly was not coming back. But they were still determined to kind of stay. And I remember thinking, time, why though are you staying? Like, why? What is it really that's keeping you here? And that was kind of probably the sense that ended up growing into the book. And then that also reminded me as well of, weirdly, well, maybe not weirdly, but of when I used to be a journalist in the UK, actually. And we did quite a lot of serious stories on coastal erosion. And we had, in where I was working at the time, had this kind of street full of absolutely gorgeous houses, like beautiful family homes that had just been abandoned to the sea, basically, and they were just become this sort of shanty town of just, and it was so sad. You could see the love, you could see the wallpaper, you could see, all the kind of kids' height charts on the walls and things, and they would just kind of fall into pieces day after day. So that was kind of the genesis of the story. And then it was interesting because my mum, again, who's very prolific on the text, as we've established, but she even texted me over the weekend with a story about Brim, which was on the ABC website, which was exactly this. It was a few towns featured in the article, but exactly the sort of thing about people leaving for all kinds of reasons. And and I think, it's really, the sad thing is really that it's 5 years ago into now how many more towns have basically been lost for all kinds of reasons, and that sense of community is really disbanded.
Yeah, so here we have the mine buying up properties, and people are resentful of others who have sold up. They're being called sellouts. So it's breeding this sense of paranoia. So in amongst all this grief and loss, we've got this paranoia as well, and quite disaffected people who are sort of whispering secrets to each other.
Yeah, and I think that's something that why I particularly like writing about, isolated rural communities, because you do get that sort of tension of people neighbours who are kind of forced to interact, and people who have to, they've lived close to each other for years and years. They know a lot of secrets and things, and they know a lot of things about each other, but the way they live their lives does impacts the people around them, which is something I don't think you get really in cities as much. I think I would find it quite hard to write a city-based story because I'm not sure I could capture quite that sort of like little ripple effect of the impact it has in small communities. So you've got a situation where in this book where you've got people who have an opportunity to sell their house for a good price and leave, but for every person who does that, it sort of weakens the position of everybody else. So I had actually got interviewed the other day by a podcast who described it as people's greed was kind of terrifying, but I never really thought that when I was writing the book. I'm not sure it is greed. I think it's a more realistic view that actually when money is on the table and people have families and commitments and, we all have our lives to lead, that actually people will, as much as you may value friendship and community, sometimes the financially sensible thing has to win out.
Yeah. You have to be realistic. And this is where Sam comes in, the young man who disappeared 5 years before. He had been working on a university project, talking to people about their views on the town and this encroaching mine. And he was gathering all of these different ideas, and this is what Roe is going back over and over again to try to pick up on some clues, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the mystery centres around Sam's disappearance, but for me the book has always been about Roe, and it's been about her response really to her son's disappearance. And I think she does, like I said before, she doesn't really sort of set out sort of see herself as like a detective type at all. I think she just is someone desperate for answers, and she has a few kind of sort of tantalizingly kind of vague sort of things that have been left behind, you know, with his disappearance, that she kind of obsessively goes over and over again. I think that was sort of something that, again, kind of going back to my journalism days, I remember, you know, I interviewed over the years, you know, a number of families who had gone through something very traumatic, and the thing that I think struck me was kind of regardless of what the trauma was, it was the way they kind of try and make sense of it, and different people respond in different ways. But one common thread I saw quite often was this sort of quest to try and like find an answer that's not there. You know, just that feeling that you've missed something. Like maybe you missed a clue, or you missed a conversation that would have given you an insight, or you know missed a doctor's note or something, you know, that just would have maybe changed the outcome. And you know, and even though you know it's not going to change the outcome, and you can see for these people it's not going to change the outcome, maybe it's that kind of driving sense of trying to change the outcome. And I think that was something that I tried to sort of capture a little bit in her character, and the kind of what becomes a bit of an obsessiveness in her quest to look back, really.
And there's just this fantastic imagery in the book, particularly with the opening, that kind of represents all that grief and loss. We have the 3 empty houses on Carralong Ridge. They're sort of almost haunted houses, and they represent this grief. Were you sort of playing with this idea of haunted houses as well?
Yeah, I did. So the book opens up with with this scene of these 3 derelict kind of houses in the town, which are sort of different in their sort of falling apart in their own ways, basically. Part of that was a bit of a throwback to those houses I mentioned earlier that I remembered writing back, quite a lot of years ago. And yeah, there was. So I never wanted this book to have any kind of sort of supernatural kind of element. Like it's a very, you know, it's a real world, you know, mystery. And but for a while when I was writing it, I did have like the kind of the working title on my computer, which is like, I mean, rather than just calling it book 6 or whatever, my working title for this was Ghost Stories, because it had that element of, I think the way it has sort of I really wanted to kind of capture like the how skeletal this town is, but also the feeling that the characters in it are really kind of haunted by their loss, you know, and there's this feeling that everywhere they go, there's these memories that are kind of following them, and that they're really struggling to kind of move on from that. Yeah,
and these houses, this is the last known place that Sam was. So if only these houses could talk. We all want houses to tell us about their histories, and it's all trapped there. No one can, and that's Rose's job is to, well, not job, this is her quest to find these answers. And I'm just interested in dwelling on this idea of grief. It's come up quite a lot so far in our conversation, because, of course, crime fiction seems the perfect place to explore these themes of grief and loss. Is that something that you particularly wanted to do here? Is it something that you've always wanted to explore?
I think it's you know, it's not like a personal hobby of mine or anything, you know, like I don't sort of you know, I would say genuinely I'm sort of quite an optimistic person, but I do think, yeah, like I think in crime and mystery novels, I mean, that is an element that is naturally there, and it's worth kind of exploring properly. And I think there's sort of a balance in terms of like, I guess when I approach crime novels, because I think, you know, it's very easy to write something very disturbing. You know, I mean, it's sad enough that you've got a 21-year-old who's gone missing, but I'm sure everybody in this room with very little effort can imagine something worse than that. You know, there's and I remember particularly when I was kind of growing up reading my parents' crime novels, and in the 90s, as a teenager, there was sort of a space of kind of really dark sort of serial killer type kind of police procedures, always like a detective and a very violent sort of horrific kind of crime, and then the detective would kind of have to, go to the, really dark places to sort of solve it. And look, I mean, I enjoyed them at the time, but I don't think I could ever write one. And I think sometimes when I read crime novels that maybe don't do much for me, it's often because I think the author's slightly gone through a bit of a shock factor in terms of, creating a kind of an incident that is genuinely upsetting, and that is what's creating the emotion. But I think that's a little bit of a shortcut, and really to move a reader and to create something moving, you've got to try and tap into that emotion. So it's more about like real grief and real responses to something that is traumatic. But I think that's where I, as a reader, am moved when I can genuinely understand why the character is so distraught and is really has had their life sort of turned upside down by this.
And I was also thinking that, you have young children, one of them's here tonight, which is so beautiful. Were you also thinking about that grief that you might feel as a mother losing a child?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I mean, to the degree, I mean, my children are quite young, so I think almost have to have it at that arm's length. I mean, it's I imagine when my children are 21, I would not be writing a book about, still
that distance, yeah.
Yeah, because I mentioned again that Good Weekend article, which some of you may have heard if you read that story. But I was asked about, what areas, areas you kind of feel comfortable writing about and things. And I mentioned in The Dry, there's a 6-year-old boy who's killed early on in that book, and I wrote that book before I had my children, and I was also like a debut novel. Well, I wasn't a debut novelist; I was an aspiring novelist at that point, and I was kind of trying to find my way through. And I was sort of drawing on things that I'd read myself, and what I kind of felt needed to be in a crime novel and things. And I think I said in the piece, I mean, I don't regret a word of that book. I love that book, and I'm really proud of it, and it's changed my life in every possible way. So I mean, there's nothing. If I go back in time, there's nothing I would do differently with that book. And I think the death of that child was, plot relevant, and it was, it was sort of, I think handled well. But now, as a more experienced author, I can't see myself doing that again. I feel like now I have enough skills that I don't need to kind of again draw on any sort of shock factors or anything super sort of upsetting to kind of get that same emotion. So it's just kind of about, I think it's about kind of, every author kind of, I think, matures, with each book, and you gain more skills that you're able to kind of put into future writing. And it's about sort of, I think, finding, just finding different ways to kind of tell stories that you feel comfortable with. And
another interesting element about your books, Jane, is that you're not really interested in good and evil. Even your villains aren't always clear-cut, and even in Force of Nature, the victim, she was quite flawed as well. So you're kind of exploring this idea that, ordinary people can just do bad things.
Yeah, I think that's true though, isn't it? I mean, I think that's more normal. I mean, I think again sometimes in particularly maybe movies or TV shows, maybe slightly more than books, but you do have that kind of real kind of, sort of the good and evil divide, and occasionally you get a bit of backstory about why that person's, what's their origin story that's turned him into this villain. But I mean, in reality, most people, most people, I think sort of try and do their best and occasionally don't, But where was I going with that? Sorry, I had a point to make about that. It was about
ordinary people doing.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, I was going to say how. So when I was a journalist, I was honestly not cut out to be a journalist. I really did do my best with that job, and I was always trying, and I was pretty good at it on paper, but my heart was just not in it because I just did not have the kind of the cutthroats sort of go-get-'em attitude that you really need. But one thing I do remember is when I was going to court cases, I'd sit there and the prosecution would kind of lay out their thing about how this person did this, and and here's some of the evidence, and I'd be like, oh yes, you've got to bang to rights, like throw away the key, And then the defence would stand up and they'd give that, in mitigation would explain. And I'd be like, oh, let him go. Like, he clearly didn't mean it. And I'd be so swayed by it. Like, I just, and I think that sort of comes out in the books, like I really, I'm always kind of, even the sort of the not great people, I'm thinking, oh yeah, but look at this on page 72. They had a bad time there, didn't they? Like, so I think you want people at the end to ideally look at the resolution and think, look, I personally wouldn't have done that, but I can kind of understand why maybe they did it.
You're trying to create this real world feel as well, of course. And with your journalism, do you think that's where your interest in research came from? Because each of your books have had a special kind of element of research.
Yeah, look, I mean, interest is probably a strong word. I think it's a sort of a bit of a necessity, I guess, to do what I feel is a good job. I think definitely the journalism absolutely helped. I mean, like I got. Against really my will, but I kind of got, as a journalist, you can't help but get used to kind of picking up the phone and asking questions of people, and just being willing to have those conversations. And I think I have to say, actually, for anybody who is an aspiring author, one thing that I remember when I was researching the early books, I'd never really tried to do research without the umbrella of a newspaper. I'd always had that kind of legitimacy of having a reason to call up people and ask them the questions. And I wasn't sure how easy that would be without that. And I have to say, even back, when nobody had ever read any of my books, and I didn't, it didn't mean anything that I was calling. I did find people really helpful, and I was quite surprised by how. I had that for the Lost Man. I had this man I'd never met. It's like a police officer drive me across the outback for like 11 hours and introduce me to all his friends and things. I mean, people were actually incredibly, like staggeringly willing to help. I think if you're kind of genuinely interested in their story and interested in kind of hearing what their life is like, people love to talk about themselves and they love to kind of show you what their life is like. So so if you are aspiring novelist, and it can be a bit daunting, but give it a go, and I think you'd be pleasantly surprised by how open those doors can be.
So, and how do you balance then that all that you've learned on your research and then what the story needs? Yeah,
look, and I mean, it is a bit of a balancing act, because I think we've all read books where you can feel that the research maybe a little bit over-researched even, or maybe not over-researched, but there's too much research on the page because the author has like learned something that they just can't bear to not put in. And I think it really is about being quite disciplined about it. And I think trying to cherry pick different bits of information that are going to help tell the story. And you can do that in different ways. You can do that sort of through dialogue, or you can do it through the setting. But a good way to sort of, I think, try and infuse the research is to kind of try and make it almost unnoticeable. So, you don't have characters kind of commenting on things that would be second nature to them, but you can still introduce it in a way that the reader will, maybe be slightly surprised, or will kind of absorb it as an interesting point of fact about the setting without characters having an unnatural conversation about things. So, it requires a bit of a light touch, and I don't always get it right first time. Like often it's sort of something maybe, and it's one of the things I would be looking at when I'm refining the drafts, and just I think writing is about taking things step by step, and that is just one of a step you have to kind of go through.
And so you talked about being driven across the outback for The Lost Man. Any other extreme research quests?
I think the other most extreme one was when I was doing writing The Survivors, which was set in Tasmania in like a coastal community, but it had a diving scene in it, and I'm not a scuba diver, and I didn't know enough about it to fake it, to be honest. So I felt like I had to go and do it, and I'd given birth 12 weeks earlier to my second child. I had to like get into a wetsuit and go into like the freezing Tasmanian waters, and I honestly hated it. Like, I mean, I think at a time I was like, oh, it's a magical experience. Thanks so much for taking me and stuff. But it was really, like, it was really grim, you know. But then the book the characters in the book loved it, you know, so I had to kind of try and... So I was saying to the instructor, what is it you like about this? What did you get out of that, you know? And they were like, oh, well, I saw, you know, like a weedy sea dragon. So I was like, yeah, but, was it worth it? I mean, but yeah, look at, like, that was once and never again, I think, for that.
You've now got your limits.
Yeah, and look, I've done it now. So, yeah. You know, if ever needed for a future book, I've still got the notes. Yeah.
And you were saying that for Last One Out, you had this note that you referred back to that was relating to these dying towns and was drawing on your work as a journalist in the UK. And I'm just thinking about true crime. Is that ever part of the inspiration for you?
Look, it's not really. Partly because I don't like true crime, like, as a consumer. Like, I don't, you know, I don't really like listening to the podcast. I don't even like reading about it, really. I think again, it does throw back to the journalism days when you see people who are victims of crime or have had a sort of a traumatic event up close, and it is so sad. It is just the saddest thing. And when there's sometimes there's children involved and you've lost a parent or whatever, and it's just like nothing fun about it. And so because of that, I don't really consume a lot of it. And again, coming back to what we were mentioning about trying to fictionalise towns as well, I think you've got to be really careful about picking kind of crimes and then trying to fictionalise them, because I think a lot of us, if there is a crime that's kind of come to a lot of attention, I mean, look, the mushroom incident is the one that springs to mind. I mean, like, we all know about it, I mean, you'd really struggle to fictionalise that to a point where people didn't know what you were talking about. So I think it's better to kind of, again, similar with the settings, try and find something that feels real without being real. It has that element, without actually being inspired by anything real.
And what about your red herrings and clues that are placed through your books? How do you go about thinking those through? Is this something that comes through in the first draft, or does it come through as you're going back over it? Yeah, look, that is a bit of both. I think it is something that I think about a lot. Like, it's not something, I don't want to give any of you the impression, especially if you're writing your own book, that it is something that comes like really easily or naturally. Like, I mean, I would spend... you know how to talk about like ballet dance and stuff, you spend a lot of time making it look effortless, and that's exactly the kind of thing you want to create with like the clues and the red herrings. They want to appear like so seamless that the reader sort of barely notices them, but they are there. And a lot of that is really about building scenes that allow you to tell readers things without really knowing it. So one of my kind of favourite ways to do it is I do a scene where the reader feels like the reader feels like something is being revealed to them. So there'll be a conversation where something it's maybe seemingly important or actually important is happening, and the reader will feel, okay, that is what this chapter is about. But within that chapter, something else will be has happened. There'll be a mention of something that will become important later on. So it'll be there. It'll be clearly, there in black and white. There's no denying it later that you were told. But ideally, you didn't notice at the time because this thing was happening over there. It's kind of a magician's sort of sleight of hand type thing. But that's one way I kind of do it. So yeah, you can all look out for those now. But another, and I think, look, another way as well, I think throughout a book as well, you need the kind of the ebb and flow, I guess, of it. And so I will kind of, when I'm doing my plan, I use placeholders quite a lot. So you can kind of feel that something will need to happen at this point, even if I'm not quite sure what it needs to be. So when I'm doing my plan, I'll have... I'll have in a plan, I'll literally have something like,
the main character discovers a clue here. And I may not know at that point what that clue is going to be or what it's going to mean, but I can feel that will need to happen. And then later on, something will happen that changes their viewpoint about something that's happened earlier. And again, what will that look like? And even if I'm not quite sure what it's going to be, just knowing that those incidents need to happen allows you to kind of let it tick over, and you'll sort of start watching for it as you're kind of doing the rest of the plan. You can kind of keep in mind, okay, well, maybe it will be this. So, even if you're not quite sure exactly what it is, it's worth knowing there's something like that is going to happen at that point in the book.
Wow, a masterclass from Jane Harper. Pretty special. And actually, Jane, while we're on this topic of planning your work, I mean, that's a question that's coming up a lot here on Slido. Can you just talk about how you actually plan your books?
Yeah, so what I do, what I do now, and this is like the refinement of 6 books. So this is kind of what works for me at the moment. So when I'm thinking about the book, I am thinking about the ending, which I've sort of spoken about before, but I'm sort of thinking about what is that resolution first of all, like what really happens, what's brought them to the point, who's involved, and then you kind of bring out like who would know and the setting, like what would maybe be a good setting to support that kind of incident, I guess, and so I'm sort of building it out from there, but in a more kind of specific, practical way. Often what I will end up doing when I've got a bit of an idea, I'm always writing down notes as well. Like, I know this is so boring, but if you have an idea for your book, like, please just write it down. Like, I just do it on a notes app on my phone. I'd love to say I do in like a leather parchment, with a quill or something, but I do it on notes app, especially because it allows you to search later, which is quite handy. But you'd be amazed, honestly, by how much you do forget. And then also it does allow your brain to kind of forget about that and think about something else. So we make lots of notes. And then what I will do, and this has saved me actually so many times, is there'll be a point where I think, okay, I know what happens at the end, and I can kind of know where I want to start this book, but what on earth is going to happen in the middle? Like, this is like 300 pages to fill. Like, what is going to happen in those middle 20 chapters? And that will feel like a void, like a desert. Like, what, maybe you've got 1 or 2 ideas, but it's a lot of space to fill. So I tend to I will write down everything that I can think of that happens. So kind of, yes, the person needs to find a clue. There needs to be, they have a fight with their girlfriend. They discover that so-and-so isn't who they thought they were. Like something like really kind of basic points about like the main key points of the story. Again, with placeholders, even if I'm not sure, and then I will put them in the best chronological order that I can, and that allows me to then see the gaps. So if he has a fight with his girlfriend, at some point earlier, we need a scene where we introduce the girlfriend. We need to kind of see their relationship. If the pub burns down, we're going to need a scene earlier where they're all at the pub, and we can get a sense of the pub and what it means to them all, or something like that. So you can kind of fill in the gaps, and I just kind of go through and I just try and fill in all the gaps as much as I can, and I just keep on going through and through until finally you do have a bit of a sense of a bit of a running order of kind of the scenes you need to have, and that just gets me through that horrible kind of desert-like feeling of like, how are these people going to get from A to Z, with all these middle chapters to fill.
Yeah, the desert is terrifying, right? Now, I'm really interested as well, Jane, that you work with 3 editors in 3 different countries, don't you, for your books? I'm curious about what the different editors bring. What does the American editor query you on as compared with the Australian editor, as compared with the British editor? Yeah,
so interestingly, we come back to that Good Weekend article, because the journalist in that book said, I think in 20 years, I'm the only author she's interviewed who works with 3 editors in 3 countries. And my question, honestly, is how do the others get away with it? Because I was never given a... I don't remember ever obviously being offered a choice in terms of like funneling this all through one person. I just seem to have these editors who all kind of weigh in on it, which I have to say, look, they are really good, and they really do elevate the book. But it is quite a different experience. I think the reason that's happened is because the books, sometimes people sell a book to a publisher, and then that publisher will license it out to other publishing houses. But for my book, it got sold kind of separately to different publishers in the UK, Australia, and the US. So they all have an equal say. Yeah, they all own the book equally, which means they all get to kind of weigh in on it. But they're good people, and they're good at their job. So we sort of streamline it a bit so that they all get the book at the same time, and then they will. I think they maybe even discuss among themselves sometimes, and we all get all their notes at the same time. Coming back, and I asked them though to give me their notes individually. Though, like, I don't want a big group notes, because I do find it quite interesting to see who agrees. It's interesting for me to know if they all agree on the same point, or if they differ. And often the most useful ones are the ones where they do all agree. So, for example, with this book, for the first draft they all saw, they all kind of guessed the ending, but for different reasons, which I thought was quite interesting, and also for the wrong reasons at times. So it was interesting because they kind of landed around the area they needed to be, but I would say more by luck than design. And I think they would agree that, because they kind of stumbled across it. And so we had a bit of discussion about that. And I have to say, that's not unusual. I've had that actually happen before in books as well. And I think, the way to kind of tackle that is to sort of work out what it was that led them kind of stumbling into this area that you don't want them to be in, and like dial up or dial down different things around it. So, is it a question of like needing to kind of make a secondary character slightly more prominent, or is it a question of dialing down the importance of a couple of scenes? Or so there wasn't actually huge, like, that sounds like a dreadful kind of thing to happen, but it's not really that bad, because if you know about it, you can fix it, and it wasn't a lot of rewriting. It was more just kind of changing the volume on a few things. And so then when it went to the next round of editors who see it for fresh eyes, like none of them guessed. So it's good to kind of have the different stages and be able to kind of test the waters and see and I guess that's what the editing process is really, so that you can iron out the mistakes before it actually gets printed and sent out to bookshops.
Yeah, they're working hard. Well, now it's your turn. Thank you so much for sending me your questions through Slido. There's some wonderful questions here, and some of them are the same as mine, so I'm thrilled as well. Everyone wants to know about your adaptations, the screen adaptations. So we had Force of Nature and The Dry with Eric Banner, and then we've had this beautiful Netflix series of The Survivors. I mean, the landscapes in all of them is just so beautiful. They're incredible. But the question is, have you been happy with them? Yeah,
look, I have been. Yeah, I mean, I think the adaptations have been great, and I think it's fun for me, I think, as an author to kind of see, like, I guess, experiences the story in a different way, because I'm so close to it in the books, I can remember all those like early drafts, and it's hard for me to kind of step out of it and experience it fresh, but the adaptations allow me to do that. And yeah, look, they're really good fun. I think I'm kind of it's interesting kind of selling your book for an adaptation. You really do have to let it go, and that's, I have to say, that's taken me a little while to kind of get to that point of being able to recognise that this is something that you have to sort of, my book is my book, and the adaptations belong to those creators, and ideally, if you're lucky, which I think I have been, they complement each other. And they're something that the readers will enjoy and that I can enjoy, and that sort of celebrate the things that the readers have liked about the books. But they've been really good fun, and it's been so great to see, I think, the characters captured and the beautiful scenery. And then also, my only real hope for them ever is that it's something that the readers will enjoy and be able to embrace and feel like they recognise, things that they enjoy in the book in the adaptations. And I think that's happened for all three of them. So, so it's been really great. And seeing them, the way they've brought new eyes to the books as well has been really good too.
Now we're going to sort of go through a bit quick fire, Jane, to get through a few of these questions. The Dry opened with blowflies. Oh, this is from Rowan. Thank you, Rowan. And now it's boot prints that set the scene in the opening of Last One Out. How important are the opening sentences for setting the story's atmosphere?
I think really important, and I think that the opening pages are probably. I would spend more time on them than probably any other pages in the book, even the ending, because there's so much that goes into it. You've got to set the scene, you've got to kind of grab the reader, you've got to let them know where we are and and what's happening. And so again, another thing I would say, if you are writing your own book and you find the beginnings really hard, they are really hard. And I find often sometimes it's good to just get something down, move on, and then maybe come back to them later when you feel a bit more confidence in the story and you know a bit more where you are. It's often then a little bit easier to tackle them. So, but yeah, a lot of work goes into that opening.
Elaine asks, your books are set in regional Australian towns. What's the appeal of those settings to you compared to an English village?
I think just because I live out here, it's I'm not sure if I think if I'd stayed in England, I probably. I like to think I probably would have still tried to write a book. I mean, but and I don't know what that would have looked like, but I can guarantee it would not have been The Dry. I don't think there's any way I could have written those books without being here. But I think same in England. I'm not sure I would feel confident tackling a book about anywhere else really without kind of immersing myself in. And I think also we live in such a great country. There's so much. For us all, but particularly for writers, there's so much inspiration. So the landscape is just such a gift. Why really would I kind of look anywhere else for it?
Nicola asks, will you ever bring back Aaron Falk, or is he still content working in the vineyard?
Yeah, well, look, I think I feel he would be. I think. It's well. Look, my mum has anything to do with it. I'm sure. Look, I've got an advocate very close to me who's going to be pushing for that. And I think. Look, I did go into Exiles. Absolutely. That is the last Aaron Falk book, and I had to kind of go into that. Wholeheartedly, thinking this is it, and. Because that allows you to kind of put everything into it. You're not trying to hedge your bets and kind of keep some things back just in case. Because I did really want to give him that ending. But do you know what? I mean, life is long, and I mean, if I honestly had a great idea that I thought, this is for him and it's going to only be told by him. I mean, I would, I wouldn't just put it aside just for the sake of it. I mean, if the idea was there and the opportunity was there, I'm sure I would consider that.
Just quickly, is Eric Banner nice?
My good friend Eric, he's no, look, I don't know about. I've met him. I've been lucky enough to meet him actually quite a few times before, and he is so nice. He's he shook my mum's hand. He came and sat down and had lunch with them when they were on visiting the set and things. He is. I have to say he's exactly as nice as you think he is. So it's and I think that's also why he's so great in that role as well, because people can feel that and they just embrace him so fully. So it's been really great to have him in those films.
And is there going to be an adaptation of The Lost Man?
Yeah, there will be. Yeah, so I think. Look, it hasn't been formally announced yet, but but I'll tell you guys.
Just between us, okay?
but yeah, look, yeah. So these things take a little while and stuff. So look, I'm sure there'll be more news coming soon. But that is one. Like I held on to that for years because I really wanted like to get to that to be like the right. You know, like I really love that book, and I wanted that to be done right. And there's not filming the Outback and authors. It's very expensive. It's it's not for everybody. So yeah, but look, there's watch this space, and like when I can say more, I'll say lots.
Very tantalising. And as we're at a book event, we're at the Wheeler Centre, this feels like the right question to end on, Jane. What are your favourite genres to read?
Oh, well, look, I mean, I think we all like to think we read eclectically, don't we? So look, I like to read. I mean, look, some of my favourite authors. I mean, Sally Hepworth. She's a great Australian author. I think she's here. There she is. So you can all say hello to her on the way out. She'd love to have a photo taken with you. But her new book, Man Mabel, is just fantastic. She's so great at like the kind of just funny but gritty, very moving as well. But books. Karina Kilmore as well. She's a good friend of mine. I think she's here as well. She like Australian crime books. And has got a new one in the works. And then also, who else really good? Like Benjamin Stevenson. I really like his kind of fun twist on like classic crime novels. And then also Kate Mildenhall, who I know a lot of people will listen to. Her new book, The Hiding Place, is just fantastic. And she genre swaps a lot, but her new one is kind of this kind of working beyond a bush block that just goes horribly wrong, and it was a really I like just raced through that one. So those are some of the authors that I've really really enjoyed, and and I hope you do too.
Well, what a special night it's been. You've had a masterclass in crime writing with the master. You've learnt some background about Jane not liking scuba diving. We've all learnt a lot, and hopefully what you've learnt most of all is that you want to rush out and read Last One Out. I really loved this book. It's the emotional depth, I think, is what really drew me to it, and I hope you find that too. So on that note, you'll be able to purchase books at the back of the room, but of course Jane will be available for signing, and that's going to be happening in a different room, and ushers will happily take you to that other room. You get to explore another part of this building. It's upstairs, so I'm sure that'll be fun for you. Thank you to Readings Bookstore, who you'll be purchasing the books from. But a big thank you to Jane Harper.